properly set the stage for this review. So even though the original work of 1984 was written in 1948, it's specifically the film version, which was released in the year 1984, starring John Hurt, that I'm going to be focusing on. And after absorbing the book itself, I've come to admire how well it honours Orwell's dystopian vision. The kind of governmental orientation in Oceania is that of totalitarian control, and it even qualifies as what is known as syncretic political ideology, meaning that it's not left-leaning or right-leaning, but rather takes bits and pieces from both to form a reconciled third option. And even Adolf Hitler, in his work Mein Kampf, wrote that this third option was, the optimal and viable choice that he advocated. This could actually be partly why a few people who I've told about a natural law resource-based economy have assumed that it's something in this vein, because, said people think that if you're not left or you're not right, then you must be advocating a third political option. But they think, that must be it, because, you can't orientate society without some kind of political structure, which is completely false. But anyway, proceeding on with the film, it opens with a daily social activity known as the 2 Minutes Hate, where the members of the party, being the worker class, are bombarded with pro-establishment propaganda, as well as reinforcing the enemy image in the form of other nation-states, which may not even exist, and the image of a man named Emmanuel Goldstein, who supposedly betrayed the government and is supposedly the head of this elusive resistance known as the Brotherhood, and that's placed dead centre of this hate, and the people are even encouraged to project their hatred towards the screen. I mean, it's just watching the scene itself, watching hundreds of people just throw bile and hatred towards something that they have no idea really why they're attacking. If for those of you who are on my friends list on Facebook, you'll know that I made a little meme out of one of the guys who was like screaming up at the telly screen. I basically freeze framed of his like complete rage face, and I just put that look when you vilify TZM, vote for UKIP, and vouch for Britain first. But as a conclusion to the whole 2 minutes of hate, the screen fills with a soothing protector image of Ingsoc, as a derivative of English socialism, and also Big Brother, the elusive father figure of Oceania. This is met with the chant. Everyone gets to their feet, puts up crosses their wrists up in front of their forehead, and just starts chanting B, 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 the acronym for Big Brother. It's just very telling about how a human society can be completely and utterly duped into cult-like thinking. I mean, quite a few people have said to me that the Zeitgeist movement is a cult, purely because we question, the current dominant narrative, because we recognise that infinite growth and infinite consumption on a finite planet is unsustainable, that we promote scientific literacy, critical thinking, and, a progression out of the need for these kinds of things. And for that, we get called a cult, which is strange considering that the whole that whole mentality, that is what this current society is actually leading to. And if you think about it, that whole BB thing is it's sort of like a distilled version of the more complex equivalent of people just thinking, you got to vote for UKIP. Yeah, I could run this country better than David Cameron could. Yeah, let's vote for UKIP. Get these immigrants out of our country. Even though it's not, even though I'm a white man, I can even say that this is not my country. The United States, the United Kingdom, they do not belong to the white man. Do you know why? Because the white man invaded and stole these countries. But yeah, I mean, they have this thinking that, in order to, make this world better and to improve things, it's just a matter of voting for a particular political party, even though UKIP are probably given just as much publicity as the Conservative / Lib Dem coalition. In fact, if anything, the mainstream media glorifies UKIP and, almost revels in its controversial ideas, which are fundamentally racist, bigoted, and completely unsustainable. But that aside, but the whole chanting of the BEB and crossing their wrists, it cements the value of not just obedience, because one of the things that the character O'Brien says later is that obedience is not enough. You have to love Big Brother, and that's the thing. People they get swept up in this nationalistic fervour because they get successfully duped by this propaganda, and and then the enemy image is presented, and then right at the end said, "Here is Big Brother. Here is Ingsoc. These are your saviours. Worship." But yeah, there's that. But I'd say the parallels for this kind of thing in our current society is definitely the mainstream media. Because if you, for example, if you were to sit down tonight, because it's Wednesday today, if you were to sit down tonight and watch the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, one of the mainstream news shows, then one of the first things they're going to present to you is different fear-encouraging pieces about what the enemy image of our culture and our society actually is. Currently, one of the enemies is Ebola, which is in part, a spurious problem. I mean, Ebola does pose some kind of threat, but the threat is nowhere near as large as the media tries to put out. Remember the whole bird flu scare? Remember the whole swine flu scare? I mean, not to keep rehashing things that I've said over and over again, but I used to work for on the infection control ward for Kent and Sussex Hospital back before when Kent and Sussex Hospital was still operational. We received all the swine flu cases for the whole Kent and Sussex region, the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells Trust area, which at that time was 3 separate hospitals. But we received all of those cases. We were admitted, I think it was something like 25 to 30 patients, all suspected of swine flu. But guess how many of them actually tested positive for swine flu? 2. Only 2 of them. And but the thing is, watching the news, you would never have thought that the problem was so minuscule. This is because the media needs to sort of elicit fear in you and elicit hopelessness in you, so you look towards your elected politicians as your saviours. Now, obviously, the mainstream media doesn't, purport to be as bad as the 2-minute hate, but it's slowly getting that way. I can imagine very easily how the news every evening can be concluded with something like a party political broadcast. And in fact, during election times, those sort of things are actually put in the commercial breaks for our television programming. You know, there's a reason why it's called programming, right? But I mean, another incarnation, as it were, of like a milder version of the 2 minutes hate that I recognise is there's a show on BBC Radio 2 on weekdays between noon and 2 p.m. It's called The Jeremy Vine Show. It's a current event show that mainly, it's not so much a 2 minutes hate, but rather 20 minutes hate in 4 separate sections, because it covers 4 separate topics, most of which are either emotionally charged issues or issues of no significance really whatsoever. You know, it's really just about creating an echo chamber for the uninformed and a lot of the time misinformed opinions of Joe Public. And they're saying, you know, call in, let us know what you think about this issue. You know, is blah 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 going too far, or what do you think about this? And I mean, there's one of the things that Ben McLeish once said in his The Innovation War talk, where he described the prevalence of the scientific method itself to form the basis of our decision arrival processes, and the outmoding of the idea that the uninformed and misinformed opinion of Joe Public really has no validity when it comes to how we actually solve problems, how we actually arrive at decisions to orient society and things like that. And he's, one of the things he said is that no more vox pop interviews with people who do not know what the fuck they are talking about. But the thing is, with the Jeremy Vine Show, it celebrates the uninformed and misinformed opinions of Joe Public. You know, it grants validity to any kind of opinion that, by the way, does not have its own basis and its own research to thank for its content, but rather that it's a sort of regurgitated version of the socio-political rhetoric that has been offered to us by the media and by our politicians and our established institutions. People are just regurgitating stuff that they have just been told. They're not actually speaking with any real authority about matters of real importance, and reveling in telling people about things that really are not important. So, and especially with Radio 2's Facebook page, by the way, which I am now blocked from because I loved to use that page to encourage like discussions with people about how we can actually solve problems instead of just ranting about just regurgitating opinions. But they would put up a picture of each topic each of the 4 topics that they were discussing on the show, and they basically just leave the comment section for people to just spew out all these sorts of things. And I'll tell you what, if you want to lose hope in humanity, I dare you to read through an entire thread of one of those. Read through the entirety of one of those comment threads and see the sheer level of stupidity, blind rhetoric, and ignorance that is displayed by the people who are willing to offer their 2 cents. But yeah, I mean, and also to top it off, one of the things in 1984 is that there's posters all over the place, like big posters of the close-up picture of Big Brother's face. Big Brother, who no one even knows whether he actually really exists or whether he still... I mean, he may have existed at one point in time, but maybe he doesn't exist anymore, but his image is still perpetuated. An equivalent of that in our current society is when we have billboards. Those advertising billboards? Yeah, politicians also use those. I mean, one of the things that really amused me several years ago is whenever the Conservatives put up one of their posters. I mean, I think it was before they last got elected. They were saying like, I think it was like 2011 or 2012 or something like that, and it said the year for change, and it had like a big picture of David Cameron's face on it. I mean, you can tell how easy it would be if, say for example, if they weren't putting those posters up there to advertise their campaign and to get their image out there to, familiarise people with the fact that they are running for political office. If instead David Cameron was the unrivalled and unquestioned leader of this country, there wouldn't really be anything stopping him from putting up the same kinds of posters. The only thing is, they would be used for propaganda, like pure propaganda, as opposed to, advertisement for their party. But moving on, we're on with the story. We're then introduced to our protagonist, Winston Smith, played by John Hurt. He works in what is known as, paradoxically, as the Ministry of Truth, or as it's known in Newspeak as Mini-True. It's a sector of the establishment which has a primary function of rewriting or rectifying news stories. I mean, one particular example is there's a change of the first example of the rectification is the chocolate rations, or as they call them, choco rations, are reduced from 30 grams to 25 grams, right? That's the truth of the matter. But the way that the news gets rectified is that the choco rations get increased from 20 grams to 25 grams. And because the society is so successfully duped, they think, oh yeah, increased, and they completely forget about the fact that it was 30 grams. And, and if you sat one of them down and said, wait a minute, don't you remember last week you had 30 grams as your ration? Now it's only 25. It's decreased, not increased. But in that kind of society, that wouldn't even really occur to them. But I mean, I'd say, an equivalent of that in our current society is how the mainstream media loves to twist things into creating different stories than we would think. I mean, one of the prime examples I can think of is the whole thing recently when there was the vote for Scottish independence, and the BBC, I think it was the BBC, they love to sort of put themselves in the position of either diminishing or completely ignoring the fact that there were tons and tons and tons and tons of Scottish people and English people who were voting yes to Scottish independence. So they would ignore those, and they would overhype the people who were voting no. And there was one picture that I saw that completely revealed this, where the view, they did a sort of close-up view of the journalist stood in front of a group of no voters, and because it was such a tight angle, all the demonstrators behind the reporter filled the screen, so it looked like, oh wow, he's this journalist is stood in front of a huge throng of people. But this picture actually showed like a wider shot for, I think it was from a building nearby, and what it was is it was just like a very small group of people, and the cameraman was just forced to like go right up close, because if they pulled back any further, they'd be like, hey, wait a minute, there's nowhere near as many people. Because the thing is, because when you see it from that close angle, it looks, oh wow, there's like people fill the screen, there's loads of people, when in fact there wasn't. So, I mean, this is how the news tries to sort of change perceptions by changing the seeming reality of a situation. But on with 1984, obviously I alluded to the Ministry of Truth. The Ingsoc government is actually made up of 4 separate ministries, the Ministry of Truth being one of them. The other ministries are the Ministry of Love, which is termed as Mini-Love, which deals with torture, brainwashing and interrogation. There's the Ministry of Peace, which is called Mini-Pax, which is the military and defence sector. And there's also the Ministry of Plenty, which is called Mini-Plenty, which deals with resource allocation and rationing. But this is something that I will go into later. I mean, every now and then you've heard me refer to this thing called Newspeak, and I will refer to that later. But speaking of the rationing of products that the party members consume, they're all branded as Victory, with a big V, right? A subtle but powerful reinforcer of the underlying campaign of the party itself. Considering that there's no evidence to suggest that Mini-Plenty produces any other brands, in my research I actually found that while these products are mainly the creation of Orwell himself, I was reminded of a few months ago of these things called Victory V lozenges. Have you heard of these? I mean, they're normally sold by specialist retailers, but there's actually a newsagents in Maidstone that actually sells them. I mean, sometimes when I'm walking home, I go in there to get a drink. But they sell them by the counter, and I originally thought that they were actually inspired by 1984, since the Victory V is the brand of 1984. However, I did a bit of research on them, and they actually predate the book itself. These lozenges, I think they come from the World War II era, and originally these lozenges actually contained get this, chloroform and ether. Yeah, lozenges containing chloroform and and ether. However, they don't anymore. But some people have said that they do have like these synthetic compounds in there that sort of almost mimic the smell of ether. But I found it interesting, since it is a possibility that these Victory V lozenges were actually formed part of an inspiration for the Victory brand. Winston, as we would hope for in our protagonist, is a rebel in his own small way. He keeps to the side of the telescreen, which, by the way, is is sort of like a two-way camera sort of thing. It's like a display screen, but also a camera built into it. But he sits to the side of it so as not to be seen by it. But he harbours, a hell of a lot of, quite intellectually articulated thoughts of distaste and rebellion for what the party does, which is considered thought crime. And he keeps a diary to at least voice out some of these thoughts, and even to almost to create a record of evidence for his thought crime. But every morning in Oceania is met with a guided and regimented exercise regime designed for separate age ranges. And you see, there's like a woman comes onto the telescreen, and she like talks them through like some exercises. But the thing is, any slacking in the exercises is met with with like a reprimand, a corrective demonstration of what should be done. Like you should be able to lean forward and touch your toes, all that sort of stuff. But there's also given a reminder of the privileged life that the party members supposedly enjoy when compared to that of frontline soldiers. Now, one equivalent of this, even though I do recognise that this wasn't regimented, this was like an overall positive experience. But does anyone remember? I think it was back in the 90s. I think it was ITV, early mornings, weekdays on ITV. I think it was on the programme This Morning, but it might have been another programme. But does anyone remember Mr. Motivator? Yeah, it was a black guy. He was a fitness instructor, and he would basically come onto the television, and he would be like really like positive and upbeat and saying, "Come on, guys, you got to do this exercise." Da, 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 da. And he'd be like going through it, and he basically like combine a sort of exercise regime almost like with a dance. And it was called does anyone remember Mr. Motivator? Because I do. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I used to actually do exercises along to him, and it's strange how that sort of thing, because it wasn't something that was kept on for a long time, and that's why that's why I'm asking. Does anyone remember Mr. Motivator? Because I wonder what he's doing now. Anyway, he might actually be working for INSOC. But anyway, but as I alluded to earlier, Oceania also sports the prevalence of this thing called newspeak, which is an attempt at boiling down and purifying the English language by means of simplifying and removing ambiguity. Like an example in the book is that the word "very" is removed with the concept of plus, and if you want to express, because there's a remark that a character Parsons make where he says, "Oh, double plus good," where essentially he's saying very, very good. But it's a dilution of the English language itself, and even as one of the characters remarks, it's a destruction of the English language. I mean, in our current society, it takes the form of things like euphemisms and political correctness, where language is it's disguised. From its reality, the negativity of certain things and issues are masked with some sterile notion. I mean, I remember one example of when I lived, when I worked on the in Kent and Sussex. There was a phrase that we used because a lot of the patients that we had admitted to our ward were very old people and very, very sick people. So obviously every now and then there was a death on the ward, naturally, since old sick people do die quite a lot, obviously. Instead of, in general society, people don't necessarily say die anymore. They say passed away. And the example that we used on the ward is, if someone died and was transferred to the morgue, we would actually use the term, "They've gone to Rose Cottage." almost as though they've been transferred to some kind of elusive nursing home or something.